Okay, it's mailbag time. And it's very, very easy to get in our mailbag. You just go to my DMs on Instagram at John Middlekauff, DMs wide open, and you slide right in and you get your question answered here on the show. We got a lot. I will try to get to as many as possible. This is from Octavio. I'm a Niners fan living in Houston. Nick Wright is also one of my favorite sports media personalities, but his unwillingness to pivot off his hate toward Brock Purdy is ludicrous. He says that Purdy is aided by other all-pro players on the 49ers. But last time I checked, Montana and Young also were surrounded by Hall of Famers. He also penalizes Purdy for the fact that he never comes from behind to win a game. But that's because most of the time, he has the 49ers in a winning position. I'm not saying Purdy is Mahomes, Allen, or Lamar, but what does he have to do to gain the respect he deserves? Just keep winning. I also think, like, not getting the respect of people that talk on a television show, who gives a shit? I don't think Brock, and I know for a fact I've heard some stories, cares at all. I don't even think he's paying attention. Sometimes in the San Francisco media like asks him, Brock, what do you think of everyone talking about, like, what? I don't know. What are they saying? Like, I heard someone say this a while back. Haters don't even realize how much money they make you. And it's so true, right? And a player who's with someone that's successful, like Brandon Staley had haters because he stunk. But like Brock Purdy's having a lot of success. The team loves him. The coach loves him. Every Niner fan with a brain loves him. He's been incredible. He's a 7th round pick. So, like, to not anyone that can't acknowledge, like, he's been incredible. I don't know what to say. Like, you're just sticking on a point to stick on a point. It starts becoming a little Skip Bayless with LeBron. Anyone who just refuses to pivot, because it's that fucking obvious. Now, is he the all-time greatest thing since sliced bread? Is he a $200 million player? Got a long way to go. Like you said, he hasn't come back in a game yet. And it might happen in the playoffs. And if he does that, then there's going to be literally nothing else to say. If he comes back in a game, they win the Super Bowl, like, it's one of the great second years we've ever seen. If he wins the MVP, wins the Super Bowl as a 7th round pick. So I think part of it is, like, it's all relative. Like, where does he come from? I understand if he was, imagine, and I've said this over and over, Trent Williams said this a while back. If Brock Purdy had been drafted where Zach Wilson or Trey Lance and was doing this, we would call him like a generational player. But when you're a late round pick, and most people to begin with are going to be hesitant to hitch their wagon to you as a take, right, that's not a fan of that team, you're going to have to go above and beyond. It's going to take some time. It's happened consistently with, Dak Prescott to prove he was a good player. Kirk Cousins, it took him like a decade to prove that he was a good player. So I think a lot has to do with draft position. I know we are not very good, but if we get in the playoffs, do you think that we could upset Philly or Dallas? I'm a Saints fan. I don't. I have a hard time seeing Dennis Allen and Derek Carr win a playoff game. I still am not betting on you guys to make the playoffs. I have a hard time with what I've seen this year, and I had high hopes. I picked you guys to be like an 11-win team. But Derek, for the most part, has not played well, and I just don't trust your head coach. And I'm sorry, I don't give you much credit beating DeVito. You guys, maybe you'd have a better chance depending on if Philly kind of imploded down the stretch. I just think Dallas would be a tough matchup for you. They can rush the passer. Derek's not very good against pressure. They're a fast team indoors. Even Philly, with all their skill guys on offense, I think you would be a major, major underdog, even though you have a home game against anybody. Now, it's football. It's a one-game situation. It's not, basketball or baseball where, I guess baseball, the cream doesn't always rise, but in basketball, usually the best team wins the series. Football, weird things can happen. Maybe Dak throws a couple picks, but I think the Cowboys are going to beat any team they play in that 5-4 matchup. I watch every show. You're awesome. Like this guy. Mailbag question. When Staley gets fired, you always see folks saying, you never want to see someone lose their job, but ... it was time for a change. I disagree. These head coaches make so much damn money compared to the regular working man. I don't think we should feel bad for them at all when they get fired for being terrible. Is that unfair? I feel bad for the guy making $70,000 with 3 kids at home who gets laid off. I feel bad for the guy who's business goes under because of, COVID restrictions in 2020 and 2021 because he's in a state that, locked his business down. Like that's who I feel bad. Do I feel bad for Brandon Staley, who was making millions of dollars, who was not in a position that he ever should have been in the first place? Zero remorse. I have no remorse when any of these coaches get fired who aren't good at their job, right? I mean, it's like, one, they get paid to go away. Most humans are at will employees. So when they get fired, maybe they get a month or two severance. A lot of these guys that get fired have years left on their contract, millions of dollars to go home. And most guys, like, listen, if you're good and you get fired, you immediately get another job. Sean Payton quit, but Mike McCarthy, Andy Reid, like Doug Peterson, like the cream always rises, right? Or you get another coordinator job that pays seven figures. I feel it never crossed my mind once of like, it sucks for Brandon. Now, do you know who it sucks for? I've been fired in the NFL. I was making, I think, 60 grand. Like, yeah, it kind of sucks. I had to figure it out. Now, was young, time was on my side, and I figured it out. But you're making millions of dollars and you get fired? No. Not players get run out of the league when they're not any good. It is part of the business. It is a very competitive, highly paid industry that, you take these jobs, you're hired to get fired. It's kind of the way it is. And if you can hold that job for 3 or 4 years alone, you make a ton of money. And regardless, even if you get fired the first year, you get, 4 and 5 year contracts. So I think he's an all-time scam artist. I really do. Says the right things, interviews well, skinny looking guy, looks the part, I guess, and fooled the Spanishes. And I don't think he's ever getting another head coaching job again. Question for the pod. I'm not a Charger fan, but should the new GM coach consider trading Herbert and a first to the Bears to get the number 1 pick? Draft Caleb Williams and reset the clock? No. In football and sports in general, the entire point of having a high draft pick, and especially in football when it comes to a quarterback, is to land a Justin Herbert. So once you land a Justin Herbert, you do everything humanly possible to build your team, to build your organization, to hire coaching staffs, and as a GM, to pick the players around that guy and to make him successful. There is no guarantee. I don't care how hyped up the prospect is that he's going to be any good. We see time and time again players with a ton of hype that get drafted and just aren't good football players. It literally just happened a couple years ago. Zach Wilson, pick 2, awful. Trey Lance, pick 3, he's a third stringer. Justin Fields, pick 11, he's about to get traded. Mac Jones, pick 15, not good. Now, obviously, Caleb's a better prospect than all those guys, but I do think it speaks to who would ever saw Brock Purdy having. You never know. And you have Justin Herbert, good guy, under contract. It's not even, to me, I wouldn't even entertain it. I guess your job is to take phone calls, so obviously you're not going to hang up. You just maybe listen to the phone call, but I think it's pretty easy to end with, yeah, we're not interested. Assuming San Francisco, Dallas, and Philly all either win out or at very least go 3-1 in the last quarter of the season, should San Francisco versus LA be the last Sunday Night Football of the regular season? McVay versus Kyle in a scenario where Kyle has to win to keep the 1 seed and McVay might have to win to get in. I think the final game, and I looked at the schedule the other day, is already shaping up to be Buffalo, Miami for the division. Because I think if Miami loses one of the next 2 games, they play Dallas and they play the Ravens. So let's just assume best case they go, I guess they could sweep, highly unlikely. I think they lose this week to Dallas, but they go 1-1. And Buffalo plays the Chargers, who literally quit last week. And they play one other terrible team. They play the Patriots. So assuming they're 2-0, that game would be for the division. So I think anytime that you have a game for the division, which means a home playoff game, especially with Josh Allen, I think that I just, if I was a betting man right now, that's going to be the Sunday night week, whatever it is, 18 game. What are your thoughts on the high number of mobile quarterbacks in the National Football League? It seems like most quarterbacks in the NFL can move around, especially the younger, recently drafted guys. Personally, I think the focus on mobility and extending plays has made quarterbacks significantly less efficient and turnover prone. Well, the NFL can only draft what they're given. And like when I was a kid, all the quarterbacks kind of looked the same, right? They were the Peyton Mannings, Ryan Leafs, to Phillip Rivers, to all that crew of guys, right? Carson Palmer. They were tall pocket quarterbacks who were the least athletic guy on the field, always. And that has dramatically changed. Like if Peyton Manning was in the draft, like, yeah, someone would take him. Though I think the offensive line play is dramatically worse. So non-mobile quarterbacks, you would just get sacked more now than ever. Even Peyton and Tom, and you saw Tom last year, most offensive line, one, the injuries have gone up. And two, there's not as many good players at that position. We've talked about it over and over. The practice schedule, the development is not the same. Yet the amount of good defensive linemen every year, a ton of guys are getting drafted high. And half those guys turn out to be impact players. And there's already a ton of impact players in the league. So I just think it's more of a result of what's playing at the lower levels and what comes up. And I would want a mobile quarterback. And I think 100% you can have a mobile quarterback. And when I say mobile, I don't necessarily mean like Kyler or Lamar. Like Patrick Mahomes is really mobile. Brock Purdy's mobile. Obviously, Josh Allen is really, really mobile. Herbert's mobile. Why would you not want an athletic guy who can also play within the pocket? I think in a perfect world, you want both, right? You want John Elway. Obviously, the greatest quarterback of all time is a pocket quarterback. But most other guys kind of in that crew, Joe Montana could move. Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers could move. John Elway could move. Steve Young could move. Peyton can't. Dan Marino can't. But a lot of quarterbacks had some mobility just to get outside the pocket. So I don't know if it leads to more turnovers. It definitely leads to, I guess that's fair. A hero syndrome when you're out trying to keep a play alive. But I like that in my quarterback for sure. NFL fans, it's time to unwrap nonstop football action. This holiday season, throw down on the big matchups with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. This week, new customers can bet just $5 on the NFL and score $150 instantly in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook now with code JOHN, John. New customers can bet $5 on the NFL action to score $150 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. I'm a Falcons fan and have been contemplating this all season. Should the Falcons bring back Arthur Smith, assuming we draft a quarterback early in next year's draft? He hasn't shown very much ability to utilize his offensive weapons to the fullest extent. Do we give him one more year with a new quarterback and see how it goes? Or do we start fresh with a new head coach and a new quarterback? Well, I think most young coaches are going to, let me rephrase that. Young first-time coaches are going to struggle if their quarterback position sucks. Now, one thing I didn't quite understand is why they were so confident in Desmond Ridder being a good player, right? He wasn't a super high pick. What was he, a third rounder? I think a lot of people, like the Cincinnati career, which he was playing at a lower level of football. We saw him against the big boys in that playoff game. It was pretty ugly. And I think he's shown a lot of those qualities in the NFL. Obviously, the game against the Panthers, he had one of the worst picks you'll ever see. I never was a huge believer, but that's who he staked his career on. Is Arthur Smith good? I don't know. I'd be lying if I said I watched that much Falcons football, but I didn't like the pick at 8 with Bijan Robinson. It didn't make that much sense. And now, is he picking the players? I don't know. They have the GM is the former Saints guy. So my guess is he gets one more year, but it has not gone smooth. It really hasn't. And one major issue for the Falcons is when their quarterback play, Matt Ryan started falling off a cliff. Now they've just been a meh franchise. They are just pretty meh. And you're not shitty enough where you're going to draft super high to get one of the top guys. So I don't know. I think you probably run it back and try to sign, maybe trade for Justin Fields. I think that's what most people think Justin Fields is going to be on the Atlanta Falcons. I don't know why we all just assume that, because there are going to be other teams that need quarterbacks, but feels like where it's going to go. Big fan from Tijuana, Mexico. I like Tijuana. Why did Brandon Staley fail so miserably as the DC in LA? Or could you argue that given his track record with the Rams and adding his revolutionary ideas, a fresh, new, and young voice, open-minded, hottest DC on the market, this was a great match given the talent and the organization and obviously a top 10 quarterback. But year in and year out, he fell flat on his face, ranking in the bottom half in every statistical category. I've gotten to the conclusion that he was a great defensive coordinator because he had a generational, foundational, cornerstone players in two key positions, Jalen and Aaron Donald, at the peak of their powers, hiding his defensive coordinator shortcomings. But I am no expert, and this assessment is a little bit superficial and lacks a lot of in-depth explanation. I think the hardest part about transitioning from a coordinator to a head coach, and one, he was only a coordinator for 1 year. So his sample size, and it was 21, 22, it was in the COVID year. So it was a super weird year. And like you said, they had two guys. Aaron Donald's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and Jalen, is having a fantastic career. They also just had a very buttoned up organization. Like that team had been winning. McVay was a fantastic head coach. But when all I have to worry about as a head coach is 20, 25 guys and making sure, and I don't have to think about anything else. Like a guy gets a DUI, a guy breaks his leg, something happens with a practice squatter, something's weird with the travel. None of it's on me. I only have to focus on defense. And also that year, remember, it was very Zoom heavy. I think you look back, it was a little bit of a Fugazi year. I mean, it's an all-time quarterback Fugazi draft. So I think a lot of guys get overwhelmed when they're the head guy because there's a million things going on. You got to worry about your offensive coordinator. You got to worry about your offensive players. You got to worry about everything going on off the field, and you get overwhelmed. And when you watch the Chargers play, their players, like, do I think Brandon Staley, if you got him on a whiteboard, would know where everyone's supposed to go? Would go, well, this coverage should have worked if this guy was here. Yeah, but it does not matter as a coach how much you know, right? Like any parent listening to this, if you're trying to instill life lessons, eventually your kid, like I know, I remember my parents telling me all these things growing up. And until you go through it, like it's hard for it to really resonate. And then the older you get, that's why in my late 30s, I think about things that I was told like when I was 10, 15 years old, because like, I can finally get it. Even looking back to college, like finance class, kind of bored me. I didn't have any money. I didn't even know what any of the shit meant. And the older you get money, you're like, God, you start realizing all these things start resonating with you. And I think that a lot of guys have, one, he lacked experience. So all of his knowledge, giving it to these other guys, I just don't really think he knew what he was doing. I really don't. And do I think he knows defense? Yeah, probably. Do I think he knows how to properly communicate it as a coordinator / head coach to the entire group? I don't, because I watched his team play and they never were on the same page, ever. So, yeah, I mean, and this is another question. Do you think he'll ever get the opportunity? I would say this, like Tom Telesco. Most general managers, if you look, historically, like a great name, like a Ron Wolf type or Bill Polian, they might get a couple spots or a couple shots, but GMs usually get one bite at the apple. And Tom Telesco had got 11 years as a GM. He hired 3 coaches. I don't think he'll ever be a GM again, even though he wasn't that terrible. And it's not maybe all on him who he gets to hire, right? His owner is so cheap. They might have forced some coaches on him that maybe he wasn't all on board at the time. But I do think you can never say never. I do think it was as ugly as it was that it would be very, very difficult for an NFL team to hire Brandon Staley. So I'd say the same thing with Joe Judge. It was just so like, I don't know. It's hard to shake that. Now, you never say never. Like, a lot of guys, a lot of coaches, like Ron Rivera. I mean, coaches get second chances that you go, how did that happen? But I would, at least in the near future, next 5-8 years, hard to see that. Hard to see that. He also coaches on the wrong side of the ball. So when you're a defensive coach, you're just moving forward are going to be less likely to be the guy people pick. The other thing is, if they get a real coach in there and then the Chargers are good, I mean, really good, like start going to the playoffs every year, Herbert starts dominating again, I think that'll be a poor reflection on him. Like Mark Jackson, who had some red flags, like when he was there, players didn't like him or whatever. But one reason he's never sniffed another opportunity, it's like, God, how did you not dominate more with this Warriors team? I hate Arthur Smith for fantasy football reasons, but I've watched a lot of their games because of Bijan Robinson. At what point does ownership give up on him? His play calling and misuse of stud offensive players is embarrassing. Bijan, Pitts, London, all play great when featured. Can you misuse players, fracture the locker room? Well, for sure. And I think the number one job of any good coordinator, whether it's pass, whether it's run, whether it's screens, whether it's deep bombs, regardless of the play call, get the ball in your best players' hands over and over and over again. Andy Reid did it forever with Mahomes and Hill and Kelsey, right? Kyle Shanahan is currently doing it with all the guys. Find ways to get them the ball, however that is. It doesn't even matter how the play looks. Get the ball in their hands and then let them cook. And for whatever reason, I hated the pick at the time. Fucking hated it. It's like they just had a rookie running back who was good. You're taking a running back there when you have a million other needs. I didn't understand it. I really didn't. If anything, I thought they should have traded up for Anthony Richardson. And maybe they tried and they didn't get it done. I was talking with a buddy about wide receivers that make a lot of contested catches. And we named a few: A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Jefferson, and Mike Evans. But we were struggling to name more off the top of our heads. Is it me or the prototype now Tyreek Hill? And could there be a resurgence of big bodies like Julio, T.O., Anquan, Randy, because Reek is actually one of a kind and no one will be able to replicate it? Well, it all depends on the wide receivers coming into the NFL, right? The draft dictates that. Like Marvin Harrison's going to be a top 5, 6, 7 pick. Why? Because he's a big-time talent. And I've heard his ball skills and contested catch ability is fantastic. So is the dude at Florida State, Coleman. Fantastic contested catch guy. But you look last year, like, who are the guys having a lot of success? Zay Flowers, smaller guy, but just a dynamic player. I watched Jordan Addison. The guy's really, really good. I like, to me, the skills I look for at wide receiver would be ball skills, would be like one of my, obviously, route running, getting open, and catching the ball, and being able to catch the ball in areas that aren't easy. Devontae Adams is fantastic at it. Keenan Allen, fantastic at it. Right? You have to have, even Debo, smaller guy, he can make contested catches. So that's just a thing when you're evaluating a wide receiver, he has to have, because you used Anquan. Like Hopkins the same way. Those two guys could never run, but it didn't matter. They could box you out. They could be physical. They could make a catch in traffic or with a guy draped all over. So it's just a skill you have to have. But Tyreek Hill can make contested catches. He has incredible ball skills. Brother and I are big fans. He gifted me some of your merch for Christmas. I like this guy. Don't sleep on Jake Browning. Jake Browning's hot. Big game against the Steelers this week. Big game against the Steelers. Happy Brandon Staley firing day. People, see, here's the thing. While I don't feel any sympathy or listen, here's a good life lesson. Most people, when you go through terrible things in your life, probably don't care as much as you think. Now, obviously, your short, immediate family, your wife, your family, your brothers or sisters, your close friends. But most people are kind of worried about themselves. So, like, listen, I don't get any joy in Brandon Staley getting fired. I don't even care. I mean, that's just, I'd like the Chargers to be good. They're not going to be this year. It was inevitable he was going to get fired. Whether it was after an ass kicking like that on Thursday night or at the end of the season, like his career with the Chargers was over. But I'm not like, I don't care that much to like get joyful in other people's, like, I don't get joy in other people's misery. So Brandon Staley's failure, like, it was a take of mine. I thought he was a fraud. And I'm not even obsessed with being right or wrong. Like, I'm wrong all the time. Like, I thought the Montez Sweat trade was insane. Actually, he's aging pretty well. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Right. And I definitely like failure. Like, a lot of people get joy in other people's struggles. It's not me. I don't. I just paid to talk about football, and Brandon Staley was, just a major NFL topic. Longtime listener and longtime Ram fan. 2 questions. Something I've been thinking about in regards to the mess that is the Panthers. Not only do they have the worst team in the NFL, a possible bust at quarterback, and no first round or second round pick this year, and a crazy owner, but something that adds to the shit show is last year the Rams offered the Panthers 2 first round picks and either a second or a fourth for Brian Burns. Now they will either watch Brian Burns walk or have to franchise him and pay a ton or get way less capital than they could have gotten last year. What are your thoughts? Second question. You will miss the smug, unjustified confidence that permeated through Brandon Staley's pressers. Once, and this happens a lot in the business of talking about sports, when you go all in on a take, it's hard for people to pivot. And most guys don't, right? And Brandon Staley, like, I'm the best defensive coordinator. He was never going to pivot off that. So I never expected him. I just thought it was funny, and everyone should ask him every single week, are you still going to call defensive plays? But he was never going to eventually say, you know what, guys? I'm not a good defensive coordinator, and I'm going to have my linebacker coach do it. He was never going to say that. Just like a lot of people with a take like Brock Purdy sucks is never just going to be like, okay, I missed on Brock Purdy. They're just not going to say that. I would say the Panthers, organizationally, just no one's on the same page. It made no sense. One, looking back, shouldn't you have kept DJ Moore? Like, if you weren't going to sign Brian Burns, why didn't you just, because they wanted Derek Brown, DJ Moore, or Brian Burns? And in order, DJ Moore was actually the third guy they wanted. They wanted one of the defensive players. And they said no on Brian Burns. Well, if Brian Burns is like your Von Miller, Nick Bosa, or Myles Garrett, I'd understand it, and he'd be under contract. But he's not even under contract. So what the fuck are you guys doing? DJ Moore was under contract. You should have just kept him with your rookie quarterback and traded Burns in that trade. Or like you said, if they weren't going to trade him for all those picks to the Rams, why haven't they signed him? It doesn't feel like anyone there. There's no cohesion from the top down. It's just a bunch of cooks in the kitchen all trying to make a different meal. Starts with the crazy owner, but is the GM, the coach, they're just fucking all over the place. A lot of people just Brandon Staley talk. Brandon Fraud Staley. I still think it is truly one of the great quit jobs in NFL history. It really is. It was a historic loss by the Raiders, 3-0 at home. Like most of the low scoring 6-0, 6-3, whatever games in NFL history have been in tornado, blizzard-like conditions. Crazy winds, snow, sleet, rain. Totally understandable. Like, you can't catch the ball, can't throw the ball, can't cut or whatever. The Raiders lost 3-0 to the Minnesota Vikings. 3-0. Did not score a point. Hell, there wasn't a point in that game to like 2 minutes left. And for them to come back and have 42 points at halftime, I honestly think it's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. Truly believe that to my core. Do you think the Chargers could win a single game without Justin Herbert, or would they have gone 0-17? It's the NFL. I would say max. If Brandon Staley had been the coach, and you would remove Justin Herbert and their backup were Easton Stick and I know he works for NFL Network now. He's technically retired, but like Chase Daniel, like that was kind of their quarterback room, something like that. I think they would have been competing to be one of the worst teams in football because their defense is awful and they would not have been able to score. So they would have been really, really bad. They would have been really, really bad. Now, they would have had a couple games where maybe, Bosa was on the field and Mack was on the field, that both those guys get 6-7 sacks total, and they win a game like 13-10, playing like a crappy team. But for the most part, I think they would lose a lot. Are the Giants completely screwing themselves by losing a top quarterback in the draft by winning all these meaningless games? Or do they have something in DeVito? Jones, clearly not the guy. I'm torn on this because I talk a lot of shit about the NBA when it comes to tanking. I think teams trying to lose right in December, which a lot of teams do, and obviously a lot of teams tank down the stretch of the season. It's just bad business. And the media loves it, right? But the media loves a lot of things that the fans don't. There's a huge disconnect between people that cover sports and people that provide all the money for sports, given that they're the fans, right? And I think, listen, in football, one of its great attributes that other sports don't have is everyone tries all the time, right? Even when I worked in the front office, like we were talking about draft picks in October, but coaches and players do not care at all. The coaches don't get involved in the draft process till like March 1st, like the combine. So they're not even thinking about that. Yet that when it comes to the players, I mean, most of the players, you're like traveling on Saturday, you're not super locked in. You don't even care because that guy they draft might take your job. And this is not guaranteed contracts. So you should always try. And DeVito to me was a fun story. Played with the Saints, did not go as well. And obviously got KO'd in that game. But I think DeVito could still be a backup quarterback. And the problem is then you got a highly paid backup fringe, not great starter in Daniel Jones coming off an ACL, Tommy DeVito. Your quarterback room is kind of in shambles. But these last 3 weeks, you play the Eagles twice. It does not behoove you to beat them, but they're going to try to beat them. And I'm recording this before the Monday night game. It would not shock me if one of those games gets weird. If one of those games against the Giants get weird. I mean, Brian Daboll's going to try to beat those guys. I'll promise you that. So will Wink. So will just the players. Let's be honest. Dennis Allen is the biggest clown in the league. Do you think the Saints regret not hiring a quality offensive coordinator like Eric Bieniemy? Do you think they need to go after a big name like Bill or Tomlin? Well, here's where you guys might be screwed. You play the Rams on Thursday night, which is going to be a really tough game in LA. I think I haven't looked at the line yet, but I'd imagine LA's favorite. You lose that game, then I think your last 2 games are relatively easy. So let's say you get to 9-8. Let's say you make the playoffs at 9-8. I don't know if he gets fired at 9-8. To me, for him to get fired, I think he's got to go 8-9. In fairness to the Saints, Sean quit. He had been doing an awesome job as a defensive coordinator. He's a pretty impressive guy. Like when you talk to him, clearly as a head coach, he's a little over his head, knows nothing about offense. So he's very beholden to whoever his coordinator is. I wonder if they wanted to keep a Sean Payton guy in there. Eric Bieniemy has not had a good year. Washington's a fucking joke. I mean, they are this notion that Eric Bieniemy is having success. I don't know where. Sometimes I see that on the interweb. Are we following the same league? Are we watching? What are we talking about? It's been a disaster. He's been a disaster. So I don't think that would have guaranteed them anything by any means. Non-sports question. I grew up in the East Bay, Antioch, California, class of 09, Antioch High School. My older brother that is around your age is the class of 02. Where is the East Bay did you grow up? Love the show. I grew up in Davis, California. So I grew up closer to Sacramento than I did San Francisco. Born and raised in Davis is where I grew up. And then I lived in the city for a year. I lived in Emeryville for a couple. And then I lived in Walnut Creek from 2016 till I moved here in 2022. If you were just hired as a GM, what are the first 3 things you're doing outside of quarterback and a head coach? So basically, there are 3 things you think every GM should do. Well, that's a good question. Obviously, if you're hired to hire the coach, there is no bigger job. That is your entire livelihood. So does the coach hire me? Because if the coach hires me, then I'm not really in charge of anything when it comes to his staff. If I hire the coach, depending on his background, let's say he's an offensive coach, I am going to put a ton of emphasis on who we hire as a defensive coordinator. And when I got hired as a GM, I would tell my owner, whatever coach we hire, the opposite side of the ball that guy's on, and again, my focus would be on an offensive head coach, but if it is a defensive head coach, we have to pay the highest paid offensive coordinator in the NFL or the highest paid defensive coordinator. Like last year, Miami, they got Vic Fangio. We have to put a premium on that side of the ball, right? And then depending on my team, do I take over the Chargers? Then we have Justin Herbert. Because if I do, then everything around my process is how do I help that guy out? And the easiest way to help that guy out is improve my offensive line, get a physical running back, get him a good tight end. If I go to a team that does not have a quarterback, right, I need to find a way to get one. So where are we drafting? How do we evaluate the quarterbacks in this draft? Who's the free agent market? So everything to me would start with the quarterback and the coaching staff. And then from there, it's just one thing I would make mandatory with my team that would be borderline, we don't budge off this philosophy. Anyone we invest in, especially if we're starting from scratch, we do not budge when it comes to football character, right? So any guy that we acquire in the building has to fucking love football. And I think a lot of teams say that and then they give in because of the talent. And I think if you look at the Chiefs over the last 5 or 6 years, if you look at the 49ers right now, hell, if you look at the Rams, like the way they're playing right now, just like all their guys are just football junkies. When you get guys who are good at football but don't care that much, you get situations like Steelers just had with George Pickens, who had some major red flags coming out of college. And all of a sudden, some stuff's happened. It's like, oh, what's this guy's deal? Well, for every one that Tomlin turns around, some become headaches. So to me, the coaching staff and the quarterback, we can't talk about that enough, because it doesn't matter who my middle linebacker is if we don't have my coaching staff and the quarterback situation figured out. And I'd argue, even if we have the quarterback, like if I went to the Chargers, like we need to get a good backup quarterback. Look at the Bengals this year. Like Jake Browning's a real backup quarterback. Like the 49ers invested in Sam Darnold, who, listen, is he great? I don't know. But could they win a couple games with him? 100%. So I think everything has to revolve around those guys. And when you get the job, you have to talk to the owner. Like, are you going to give me the resources to spend on a defensive $5 million spend on a defensive coordinator? Can I get a Dan Quinn, a Vic Fangio, if Todd Bowles available? Like, I want to get those guys. I don't want, this guy was pretty good. No, I want the best, because that's the only way to compete in the NFL is to have a really good defensive coordinator. So I think before we get too into the weeds on like, how do we rank the DBs? Like, fuck, who cares? Offensive, defensive line, coaching staff, quarterback. Everything falls into place. And guys who were just addicted to football. The Patriots for 25 years put a premium on football character. Their best players were football junkies, starting with Tom, but Edelman, Gronk, McCourty, Hightower, Matt Slater, the offensive linemen who were good for them over that period of time. Football character is so important. And when I say football character, I don't mean like nice guy, bad guy, whatever. Obviously, you don't want a bunch of shitheads, but people that are addicted to playing football. And I think sometimes in society, it's like, balance is so healthy. Maybe for you. Not in this industry. Not in the industry that I'm in. I don't really have a life. I watch a lot of football and talk about it. Like, I don't do that much else, right? Should I have more balance? Sure. Should I do more shit? Maybe. But it doesn't really work for me, right? Do you? And most of the good teams in NFL history get guys that don't have that much balance, who are football addicts. Shit, look at Deion Sanders, right? You would think like, Deion's got a lot going on. Deion's fucking addicted to football. Was a great football player, quit playing football, and got into coaching. And he couldn't get a real job. He went to an HBCU because he wanted to be a head coach. Then he went to Colorado. Say what you want about him, but I don't dispute that guy's passion for the sport. Trent Dilfer, coached high school. Then he went to UAB. I want guys who think about football 24/7, 365. I don't want balance in my locker room. I'm trying to win a championship, not go 6-7 wins. And I would say most of the great players are kind of addicted to football. It's like all the great coaches are football addicts. If you had to rank the top 5 front offices in the NFL, how would it go? On the other side, how would you rank the worst front offices? Why? I think the Panthers just have no clue what you're doing. And I think you always have to factor in the owner, because the owner, it's easier for him to get in and sit in the office of the GM and talk deals, talk economics, top salary than it is the coach, because he doesn't know football plays, right? So I would say the Panthers right now are in complete and utter shambles. I think that they have absolutely no clue what they're doing. And I would say when you look at the best front offices, you would just say the teams that are winning. I would say that in part of it, when I say a front office, are your coach and your GM on the same page? Like Andy and Veach speak the same language. Kyle and John speak the same language, right? Howie's just an elite GM. He could just make moves, and he's willing to do stuff. And he's just always thinking how do we upgrade? How do we upgrade? And it speaks for itself. And then you see some front offices like the Giants. They're a better version of the Panthers, but their owner's really involved, likes to keep certain players, and it becomes a disaster, right? And so just look at the better teams in the NFL. They just typically have cohesion between the GM and the coach. If you do not have that, you're completely fucked. You just long-term. You might have a good season, but over a longer period of time, you have no shot. You just don't. Everyone talking about Tomlin and Belichick getting fired to only talk about where they would go. but nobody seems to have ideas on who the teams would hire to replace them. We've seen Billy O and Josh McDaniels crash and burn. And other than Ben Johnson in Detroit, I don't know who would be a good replacement. Well, there was a report this week that Gerard Mayo, the longtime Patriot linebacker, and now he's been on the coaching staff for a while, signed an offseason contract to be the heir apparent toward Belichick. Now, does that come to fruition? I don't know. But a lot of people think that Gerard Mayo is going to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots. I'm operating under that assumption based on, just the contract, what people say. Who knows if it actually plays out that way? But I think Gerard Mayo will be the coach. The Steelers, that's a hell of a question because when they hired Mike Tomlin, no one thought they would hire Mike Tomlin, right? So people would be very, very interested in that job. Now, who they would hire, no clue. They're another front office that I've had some buddies tell me, they're not quite as good as they used to be. The Ravens are another front office that's really good. But the Steelers, I don't know. I don't really see it. They have a couple high-end players, but the more and more the season goes, what the fuck am I watching? How are you guys this terrible? Who on that team, whether it was Tomlin, whether it was someone in the front office, said we need to extend Mitch Trubisky? Whoever said that, I can't take you seriously. I really can't. And everyone makes mistakes, but you had already had Mitch Trubisky on your team and then you extended him? You fucking out of your mind? Are you insane? He's objectively awful. He's just not. If you have to play Mitch Trubisky, you will lose. And when you extend a guy as your backup quarterback, he's one ankle injury away from starting 7 games. So I would say the Steelers have fallen off a cliff. I know you said on record you didn't think Gannon would end up being a good head coach. It's early, but the way the players seem to be responding, what are your thoughts on him now? Well, their team's terrible. I mean, they're going to draft 3 overall or potentially 2. We'll see how the next 3 weeks plays out. But one thing I had heard, my reaction was more just anytime you give a guy with not that much experience a shot, it's pretty risky. But my people with, I'd heard things of people that had worked with Brandon Staley. It was know-it-all, kind of a douche. People in Philly love Jonathan Gannon. I can't get anyone when he was there and they would have moments on defense. No one would say a bad word. They loved the guy. So my opinion was more this is pretty risky. Not the pew, 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 and, all that stuff, because clearly his team plays hard. People I know that have been around him really liked him. That's the thing with the Eagles. Shane Steichen was viewed very, very highly. Clearly, he's an awesome offensive mind. And Gannon, from a leadership standpoint, I mean, the story came out that Sean Desai lacked confidence. That ain't Gannon's deal. Gannon's a good leader. He's good with the players. Schematically, is he great? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to even judge him. The Cardinals are terrible. But my take always is, when Kyle Shanahan became the head coach of the 49ers, he had been a coordinator for a decade. It's part of getting a head coaching job, experience matters so much. And even then it's going to be learning on the fly. So if you're not hiring a Mike McCarthy or an Andy Reid or a Pete Carroll, a guy that has been a head coach before, the learning on the job transition is huge. So if you don't have a lot of experience at your expertise at the NFL, because coaching in the NFL and coaching in college are 2 different industries. The game is somewhat the same. Most of the rules are the same. But everything outside of the 60 minutes that's played on a football field is completely different. How you acquire players, how you coach, the time you have, the time you don't have, everything surrounding football. And I just think experience matters in any walk of life. It doesn't mean there are certain people who are just destined to be great, but most people in football have some experience before they have success or to have a chance to have success. I hear people talk about Kellen Moore getting a chance at the Chargers head coaching job. He got fired by Dallas, and this year the Dallas offense improved. Moore got the OC job in LA, and the Chargers O is still trash. Herbert has regressed, and Eckler's underutilized, and basically looked like a bum. Why is Moore even in the conversation when it comes to head coaching jobs? I think once you get your name in the cycle, once people just start talking about you as a coordinator or as a head coach, I remember I had a buddy who was a quarterback coach for a long time, and then he became a coordinator at a place. I'm like, why did you take this job? He said, once you become a coordinator, you get in the coordinator cycle. And then you get several of those jobs before you're kind of shoved back to be a position coach. That's if it goes bad. He's like, if it goes well and you have success, you become a head coach. So you change the financial future of your life. And Kellen Moore, over the last several years, became a coordinator who was highly thought of in Dallas and in the future head coach mix. So once you get talked about like that, it takes a lot for you to get kicked out of kind of that lane. There are some guys that are just always going to be position coaches, whether they're not great, promoters, their agent doesn't do a good job, whatever the case may be. I just think Kellen Moore's been in the discussion for a long time as a guy that knows offense. And whether that's true or not, how many guys would have gone to the Charger situation this year and had success? Okay, let's see. Piggybacking off of your talk about likely Chargers head coach vacancy, could you see someone like Nick Saban being interested in that job? Could you see him leaving Bama if he had an elite level quarterback to coach in the NFL? I can't. I think Nick Saban, I had someone pretty close with him years ago that said the moment he turned down that 10 years, $100 million offer from Texas, and this is well before anyone was sniffing that type money in college football. This is probably 7, 8, 10 years ago. Maybe a little less than 10, maybe 7, 8 years ago. It was like, I think for the first time in his career, he's become very content with his surroundings. Likes living in Tuscaloosa, likes being the head coach at Alabama, and is just comfortable retiring as the Alabama head coach. So I guess you never say never, but I think this year he's in the playoffs again. I think he's Alabama's coach until he's no longer coaching football. So that would be a no. But one thing you can't discount is there could be some names you're like, damn, that guy's interested. And I think that would be on the table when it comes to the Chargers job. I'm a Spartan fan from Hamilton, Ontario. Things haven't been too hot for the football program over the past couple years. However, their recent hire, Jonathan Smith from Oregon State, could be promising. His resume looks good, and it can't be a bad thing to have a former Pac-12 coach when 4 new teams from the Pac-12 are joining the Big Ten. He even brought a big chunk of his staff. I don't keep a close eye on Pac-12, so I'd like to hear your thoughts. I think Jonathan Smith is a star. And as being a West Coast guy, I thought UCLA made a major mistake. I think they should have fired Chip Kelly and hired Jonathan Smith. Because the moment Oregon State got asked out of the conference realignment, Jonathan Smith had to go. He took a program that has no business ever going 500. If you've ever driven through Corvallis, that they ever win 8, 9, compete to win 10 games is insanity. But he's done it. He worked for Chris Peterson at Boise State. He worked for him at Washington. He's a Jeff Tedford guy. And obviously at Oregon State as a head coach, he has been awesome. He's a former quarterback. He was the quarterback at Oregon State when they had Chad Johnson and Hushmanzada. So he played. And he's kind of got a little Jim Harbaugh. Not like he's a more normal guy, but that's the way his teams play. Defense, run the ball, physicality. He's old school for being like 43 years old. I think Jonathan Smith is an elite hire at Michigan State. And I think they're going to be good. And I think it's not crazy in a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4, that team is not only competitive, but, competing for playoff spots. And he's talked about as one of the better coaches in the country. I would bet on that. I think Jonathan Smith is legit a star. I think out on the West Coast, I think the last couple of years, Kyle Whittingham has probably been the best coach. I would put Jonathan Smith right up there with Kalen DeBoer, Dan Lanning. He's been awesome. And you can ask people that, big Oregon fans that hate Oregon State or Washington or whatever. I don't think you'll find a bad word said about the guy. I think he's a stud. And I think you guys got very lucky to get out of the Mel Tucker situation, which, let's face it, was a debacle. And to get Jonathan Smith, who's never going to be an idiot, but I would take Jonathan Smith over Mel Tucker every day of the week and twice on Sundays to be my head coach. Mel Tucker's whole career was got transferred in Kenneth Walker. Other than that, the team was terrible. And I'm not even talking about can't figure it out off the field. But yeah, I love that hire. Really do. Okay, last question. My question is, This is from Dean. Where do you rank Kevin Stefanski for the Browns Coach of the Year? I'm a Browns fan, and obviously he won it a few years back. But to me, this year has been tremendous. Considering the fluctuation at quarterback and massive injuries, yet still winning games, he has them in firm playoff position. I think Dan Campbell, if he gets to 12 wins, has to win it. The Detroit Lions have had 10 wins or more 9 times in 90 years as a franchise. They have not won the division. They have not won the division since 1993. So I think part of it is the franchise he took over. Obviously, Stefanski, what he's doing is unreal. Same with Shane Steichen. I think how shitty the Lions have been. If the Lions go 12-5, they're hosting a playoff game. I just got to give it to Dan Campbell. Based on just like Stefanski a couple years ago. Wait, you're winning with the Browns? Like, listen, Kyle Shanahan, what if he wins, 14 games? Well, they won 13 last year. He's got an unreal roster. He's a great coach, right? Like Andy Reid, Bill Belichick. It's hard to win it when everyone views your team as good and you as good. But when you take the Lions and do what he did, it's to me why Stefanski, when he went to the playoffs, won it. It's really more impressive. If someone goes to the Raiders next year and they win 10 games, they're in the playoffs, like I'm giving it to that guy. Wait, you just went to the Raiders and won? So that to me weighs heavily on how well you do. Now, the backup quarterback thing is really, look at Zach Taylor. He's winning with Jake Browning. So I think if Stefanski was the only guy winning with backup quarterbacks, he would kind of stand out a little more, but a lot of coaches, you could make the Stefanski argument for like 3 different guys. And the Browns roster, even obviously you guys have a bunch of injuries, Chubb, your O-line, but it's still pretty damn good. And your defense is awesome, but I'm going Dan Campbell.